wonder, having grown up in the Cold War, where we hid under our desks because the Russians were coming. And I was at the wall when it happened, and I was in Budapest when it happened, and we were the good guys. And the people that fought corruption over there and fought communism and tyranny, and those who, a young kid came up to me at the Berlin Wall and said, freedom to him was talking to me. Yeah. And we were the good guys. How did our president jump the wall and get on the other side, attacking Americans for causing the horrors of Somalia, the dragging of an American soldier through the streets? I mean, she's responsible for that. You know, blaming America first used to be the taunt of the far left. You know, they would attack us for everything. Right. Here, the President of the United States blames an American ambassador for the horrors of the third world, for the evils and corruptions of beyond the Iron Curtain, which he is helping to restore. It's unbelievable. If I were a Republican, I would say, I'm not a Republican, I'll admit it. And if I were a Republican, I'd say, what happened to my goddamn party? We used to be the good guys of the Cold War. How come this joker is on the other side? Because right now, today, you could call him a joker. Right now, when he calls up through a tweet to try to intimidate a live witness to prove the argument that he's above the law, to prove the argument that he is able to call a witness, humiliate her, blame her for all the wrongs of the world, and somehow this proves he's right, it proves he's the bad guy. Right. I mean, I'm extraordinary to talk like this, but it's right in our face. How can you not see what we just saw? And by the way, the chairman was quick-witted enough to move. And by the way, Danny Goldman is the best counsel I've seen. He knows how to keep his place. He doesn't act like a congressman. He doesn't show a lot of personality, but he's damn good at using the witness to be the witness. Right. And she's so much. I think my bottom line a couple minutes ago, this president is afraid of that witness. And that's why he's going a little crazy right now. Let's show him going crazy. We don't seek to amplify the toxic things he disseminates through his Twitter feed, but this may ultimately be evidence against Donald J. Trump. Here's his effort at witness intimidation this morning, delivered via tweet. Donald Trump, everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went, turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How'd that go? Then fast forward to Ukraine, where the new Ukrainian president spoke unfavorably about her in my second phone call with him. It is a U.S. president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors. They call it serving at the pleasure of the president. The U.S. now has a very strong and powerful foreign policy, much different than I don't think that's the word he meant. It is called, quite simply, America First. We're going to stop there. Let me ask you this, Chris. Donald Trump is now squarely on the side of the corrupt actors in Ukraine. It would seem that if Republicans want to make this pleasure of the president argument, its weakness is that what causes him, what brings him pleasure, is siding with bad actors and autocrats. Well, you know, to use a phrase of the left, I'll say a deep history. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, tremendous amounts of economic power fell into the hands of the oligarchs. They were once in the power of the nomenklatura, the big shots of the Soviet world. Then that power fell into the hands of the oligarchs. All that money sloshing around behind the old Iron Curtain, looking for ways to use that money and to clean it up, of course, to launder it. So in the United States, on K Street, we have people like Bob Livingston and Jim Slattery and all those, and Rudy Giuliani, all kinds of people looking for incomes after their public service, if you will. Where do they find income? From balls of the world who have to improve their image in the United States. The good countries of the world don't need to buy us. The bad guys have to buy us. So they find willing sellers of the keys to the city of Washington. They're there on K Street. That's where the big money is. We're, working for President Moy of Kenya, all the bad guys. They know where the money is. The sleazeballs have to buy good reputations. So Giuliani's over there. He's got his till out for himself the whole time he's going around. You think he's doing this for pro bono for the president? He's got all kinds of, as you said a few minutes ago, or somebody did, he has so many contacts among the sleazeballs of the behind the Iron Curtain wall because that's where the money is. So he knew who to contact, but they're all working against us. And they're working against this straight-arrow woman. I shouldn't call her a woman because that's the president's language. This State Department hero. And she's standing up as like the only tree in the forest still standing against all this sleaze and all this money sloshing around, getting into the hands of American sellouts who are trying to make a buck over here. And it's a horrendous situation. So we find ourselves in the crosshairs of it right now in a hearing where the President of the United States jumps in on the side of the bad guys in real time for all to see. You know, this is reality television, ladies and gentlemen. And he may be, hoisted on his own petard here because he's walking right into a real situation to show. Remember the McCarthy hearings. Remember what McCarthy did when he tried to destroy that young lawyer. And that's when Joe Welch jumped on him and said, until this time, I didn't realize how indecent you are. Have you no decency? Somebody should say the president, if he has anybody around him in the loop that can say it.
Who would that be?
Shut up.
Who would that be?
I don't know who. I think he got rid of all the trees. They're all gone.
Yeah. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.